Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Jack. Back again to continue our coverage of the 9.0.5 healer balance. And today we're going to be talking specifically about how the spirit shell changes for discipline and how the new updates for holy are going to be affecting them as we get ourselves closer to 9.0.5. Alright, last time we made our video, last week, we talked about how spirit shell in particular is going to be producing absorbs equal to 80% of the healing done rather than 100% of the healing done. So if you had a Toman up on an ally and you cast a smite and it's supposed to be able to heal for 100, instead if you have spirit shell up it's supposed to heal for 80. Of course there's going to be mastery and different conduits that'll be affecting this. Basically you're just going to be producing smaller shields every single time that you have spirit shell up than before. Now the new update is that the absorption limit is now better fleshed out. It's now based on a caster's spell power rather than their maximum health. This is of course super significant because we're usually used to leaning on the Desperate Prayer or taking advantage of Ankh Totem or Ancestral Vigor from Shamans, even Draven's Hold Your Ground buff as well from our Soulbind tree. We're used to these other passive health increases to be able to further allow us to bolster up our shields. And now we're going to be relying on specifically spell power as the determinant. And of course, intellect and spell power kind of going hand in hand. So effectively, what you're going to be looking at is a very big divide between trinkets and how you're going to be utilizing them. Of course, you always wanted to eat the intellect food anyway, so that's not a huge determination, but most often you were seeing people being recommended to run with the Sinful Gladiator's Badge of Ferocity, which is a PvP trinket, right? On use, gain primary stat, huzzah, right? One of the big things about this trinket is that it's, of course, giving you primary stat. A lot of people who didn't want to do PvP at all chose to run with the Soul-Letting Ruby, which is a 2-minute cooldown, so it wasn't there for every single spirit shell. But instead of PvPing, people wanted to run with this trinket to be able to get benefit out of the critical strike bonus that it gives. Now this trinket is decidedly worse, obviously, than it was before, because of the fact you're not getting any primary stat out of it, right? The whole point is primary stat is both going to increase the amount of healing that you're producing, which is also shielding, but also increase the shield cap. So this may not immediately kick in 9.0.5 because usually how a lot of these nerfs kind of go around is they're preemptively nerfing in anticipation for 9.1, the future tier. So in a lot of respects, I don't anticipate this being too big of a deal up front, but in the future, especially when the next tier progression starts going on, you're really going to be pressed to make sure that you have an on-use trinket that's going to be giving you raw intellect at a very, very consistent rate. You also have potential for even larger shields, especially if there's specific add timing that could be really, really painful going on as well, and that would be with the Imperial Ordnance, which is a DPS trinket that you're able to get from Spires of Ascension if you're in a Shadow Loot spec, which fires out 5 bolts and they return to you after 12 seconds. And then they give you a 15-second intellect bonus. So if you use this early enough, you'll be able to get your second trinket, your badge trinket ideally, back off cooldowns for your spirit shell to make one massive absorb every 3 minutes. So a lot of potential for that to start coming about, especially depending on some mechanics and how painful that they're going to be. As an example, on a Sludge Fist type encounter, you could pretty much soak up all of the damage for like the first pillar that goes out, and then when you have some of the later pillars, when there's tons of ticking damage at the same time as some of the pillar breaks, it would be extremely advantageous there to be able to have an even larger shield at your disposal so that you're not having too much of it getting eaten up by ticking damage before he breaks the pillar or roars or what have you. But otherwise, if you're going to have like a second trinket, you're going to want it to either be able to give you intellect on demand as you're ramping, or just to be able to have some kind of flat intellect on it as well, just to be able to further bolster the potential for the cap. Again, if we're going to be able to reach it with all the different changes to how much absorbs you're going to be able to put out. Next on the list with some of the disc changes is going to be in the legendary department. So they started changing around. I mentioned this in the last video about a week ago as well. They're trying to change around all the disc legendaries that nobody wants to use. Cauterizing Shadows working with your mastery. It can now critical strike, it gets a heal bonus. Kiss of Death gives you even more cooldown reduction for Shadow or Death. With regards to these, they are really not attractive at all, and the reason why they're not attractive is because, I mean, they nerfed the hell out of Shadow or Death's damage, and they crazy heavily restricted how Kiss of Death can even work. So when are you really supposed to use these legendaries? I mean, Cauterizing Shadows went from healing for a percentage of HP and healing when ads died and not when it just expired and ran off. So they keep on changing these like other things that aren't the problem. Like, we ran with these things in beta and they were great, and then they nerfed them and nobody touched them again. It was very clear where that break was. So I don't know what to tell you. Also, significant to note, the Shadow Flame Prism's Rift damage has been increased by 40%. This was another legendary the Discipline Priests used in beta. The Shadow Flame Rift, of whenever you attack, your Mindbender will jump and just do AoE damage. It doesn't convert to any atonement healing and everything, but it's just generally pretty good damage. Be interested to see if that's something just to kind of use on like lower keys just to pump out a lot of damage, but just thought I'd mention it as well since it's going to be coming up on the horizon. Finally, the conduits, and we'll talk about disc and holy since we'll be focusing on disc so far. But from a discipline perspective, Fae Guardians getting that buff as we mentioned last week. It's going to be granting 15% damage reduction, plus 10. Benevolent grants 150% faster recovery rate. And they clarified now that Wrathful Fairy just immediately jumps to an enemy if you target an ally with Fae Guardians, because you used to have to make a decision about your uptime, which was terrible. You had to say, okay, first I'm going to give it to an ally, I'm going to cast it on an ally, and then I need to actually apply Shadow or Pain or Purge the Wicked to be able to cast the Wrathful Fairy. Now they just both go at the same time. You're not actually having to make that choice of uptime between them, which is just quality of life change. But this is also further reinforcing the idea that you don't really have a Covenant ability per se when you're running with the Night Fae. You are giving that Covenant ability out to other people to be able to benefit them. From an M+ perspective, the main reasons why you would want to switch to Night Fae in the coming patch would be if you're very M+ focused, or you don't play disc and raids at all. For one, this could go for holy or for disc. If you're very M+ focused, you don't play disc and raids at all, and you are in an organized enough group, whether it's for raids or for M+, that people will actually legitimately be able to take advantage of that cooldown reduction, right? This could be very significant. We mentioned it before on Sludge Fist. If people can kind of get their cooldowns more rapidly and more consistently back for the more precise timings, that's great. But people have to be able to know that it's coming to them. They have to be able to anticipate it. And I'm sure a lot of DPS are going to be making weak auras, or be more than willing to make them, so that they can better track their cooldowns and better track the Fae Guardians uptime, so that they can put all the abilities and time all the abilities that they want all together. So if you are not in that coordinated of a group, I think Fae Guardians could be pretty poor. For one, if you're just wanting, like, one of the biggest benefits of it is, while Kyrian for Discipline will do a ton of healing and really help carry you through High Prideful, you could also just more consistently make sure your mage or your hunter or whoever, or even both of them as well, are having cooldowns up for Prideful and then having them up for the trash packs that follow, because there's also the Fate for Mana Conduit getting buffed, where you now have an 80% effective copy of the benefit instead of 60%. So that can also be more valuable to have multiple DPSers who can use short cooldowns or relatively short cooldowns, get them reduced, use them on Prideful, help you kill it there so you're not going to be as stressed, and then they have their cooldowns back for the Prideful buff that comes up to follow, and then you're going to be in great shape. Something to think about, but it's all really about, can your group actually take advantage of it? Because if people are going to sit on their cooldowns through the Prideful and make you just heal through all of it, then you're much better off running with something that's going to better synergize with it. It's much better off from like a disc perspective to have Kyrian, so you can just raw heal through it, or Venthyr if you're raid focused and everything like that works great as well. From a holy perspective though, I think that if you are not making any sort of plans whatsoever to play disc in a raid, you could pretty well get away with running Fae Guardians from a raid and Mythic Plus perspective. The fairies, again, pretty good damage reduction. The cooldown recovery can be used on yourself and on whichever person that you like a lot. And as long as you're able to consistently find places to stand still and channel him, which is always the challenge, right? you'll get great benefits out of it. And we've already seen how good Vision of Perfection back in Ny'alotha with the essences and essence system was for allowing you to get more rapid access to Divine Hymn. Just how mana efficient and how consistent it was. And we're going to circle back into it in just a second, and this is actually a great segue for it. Keep in mind, Divine Hymn is getting buffed. So Divine Hymn's increases healing taken by 4% for 15 seconds, and it stacks up to 5 times. So getting more rapid access to it, you're getting more rapid access to that increased healing buff. So now you'll have 5 stacks of 4%, so you'll have a 20%, if my math is correct, for 15-second buff that you'll be able to put out, potentially, over every two-ish minutes or so. And that's going to be really nice for you to be able to have, and just really efficient, hyper-efficient throughput. One of the big things that we've been seeing with the Nathria raid and everything is how you can really have 2 solid, distinct playstyles at your disposal, and how well you're going to be able to start flexing between them depending on what your raid needs. So this is really going to be most significant, I would say, for dealing with prideful enemies and just solo healing in 5-man dungeons and everything like that. Being able to have that 20% healing buff carry over and using it in the middle of prideful and having a 20% healing buff for the rest of the prideful is really super significant and will give you a much easier time dealing with it. And generally, this is what the spec needs, is what the spec really wants to be able to have access to. Now, regarding those different playstyles, like I was mentioning, it's a great way to segue us into the legendary discussion for Holy Priests, because they're getting a couple buffs for some legendaries. Divine Image, again, kind of circles back to the Cauterizing Shadows, Kiss of Death. Not really big legendary, and they're trying to be able to have some greater access to its different abilities. Trying to have Searing Light cast when Shadow of Pains or Mind Games is used, cast Holy Nova whenever Unholy Nova is used if you're a Necrolord, and if you're crowd controlled, then the image will just cast healing to help you out. Spell mirroring cooldown for removed, where you're Shadow Deathing and after casting Holy Fire to get like back-to-back abilities, I guess is just going to be getting removed as well, which is kind of weird, which is just seeming to hurt it a little bit more, but it's not like that many people were running Divine Image to begin with. So Divine Image, again, just like Kiss of Death, Cauterizing Shadows, I don't really see gaining much ground, but Flash Concentration has been gaining a lot of ground lately, and will continue to do so now that the buff of time is getting increased to 20 seconds instead of the previous 15. Now, this may not seem like a lot. That extra 5 seconds, especially in my experience pushing keys and everything like that, and even playing around with it in Raid from time to time, we've got a chance to do Mythic Stone Legion Generals, and I snuck in some Holy Priest gameplay there. The extra 5 seconds is actually extremely significant on 2 accounts. One, just if you have to run around, I mean, of course, the biggest downside of the Flash Conk buff is, yeah, okay, if you're running around, you can't sit still and cast and everything like that, you lose the buff, sure. The other big side of it, though, is when you have to force applying these buffs, right? Even if you're running with Surge of Light, the talent, you're not always going to get an extra flash heal every 15 seconds. Sometimes you're going to get it very sporadically. Sometimes you get like 2 back-to-back, and then you won't get any for like 20 or 30 seconds or something along those lines, right? So being able to have a bit more time helps. I really wish they would have bumped it up to 30 seconds personally, but this does a pretty decent job. They still want to make sure that's a very big challenge to it. And when we were talking previously about how Divine Hymn is getting buffed and the potential of playing Night Fae, this also starts adding to the benefit list. The more that you're able to spend a greater amount of time casting Divine Hymn, which is already a hyper-efficient ability and really, really powerful raw HPS, the more mana, of course, you're going to have on hand for other things. And the Flash Concentration playstyle in a raid does crazy good throughput, but it also can burn your mana down extremely quickly if you're not careful and you're just being very, very aggressive. So I think there's a lot of great potential for a Flash Concentration Night Fae playstyle coming in and dominating Holy Priest gameplay in a very big way in 9.0.5 and beyond, because you're having the Wrathful Fairy giving you that extra mana regen, because you're getting more access to Divine Hymn, and especially if you can plan around it and get a couple extra casts in there over the course of the fight, you can leverage that and carry that 20% healing buff bonus into a Flash Concentration playstyle where you'll have even more mana at your disposal to be able to dump into hyper efficient heals, so you can massively cover really heavy spot healing, and your passive damage is alright, just slamming Holy Fire on cooldown. It's sort of trying to put all those puzzle pieces together, a couple of those different buffs that Holy Priest already had synergy with, and trying to crank it to the next level. I think that Holy Priest can do extremely well, and I think that the rest of 9.0.5 until the new tier, you're going to see Holy Priests really start dominating a lot of the farm content, a lot of the higher end parses, as a result if they start switching around and messing around with some of those builds. The big downside, and what's kind of keeping me from switching to Night Fae, is I hate mages, and I really just don't want to punish myself super hard by not having the Venthyr ability when I'm playing Discipline. I'm going to debate on it, talk to my raid and see what they think, depending on how much the raid is getting nerfed and how strong that we're going to be getting. But I might consider playing some Night Fae before the new tier comes out. But when the new tier comes out, we'll have to see based on what other changes they might make in the future as to whether I would drop mine games, because it's so crazy strong for Discipline right now that I don't think you're able to really easily swap out from there. But we'll see. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed. Thanks so much for tuning in. If you have any other sort of questions, feel free to leave them in the comments down below. And also be sure to check out the live stream, as we've been pushing a lot of high keys as both Holy and Discipline, and getting all kinds of great action in there. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Hope you all enjoyed it. Be sure to follow and subscribe, and I'll catch y'all next time.